This channel is for educational purposes only. Please do your own due diligence before making any investment decisions. Hi, this is Joe Rabil with Invest Like a Pro. And today we're going to continue to delve into the pullback trade and give you more details into entry setups. And sometimes there's some confusion. I get a lot of questions about these things. So what I like to do is use examples that I think can really bring home the whole approach that I'm using, especially when you go into my course. I go into a lot of detail on the specific entry patterns, or what I call triggers. So I want to show a couple different ways that this stock played out and some of the things you need to look for. So let's go ahead and get into this. So just briefly, if you have any interest in learning more about using MACD and ADX in multiple timeframes, along with price structure, a lot of different material, I am offering the book at a discount through a PDF or an ebook. If you have an interest, go ahead and take a look at rabilstockresearch.com/book. Okay, I've got my grid of AMD up with a monthly in the bottom left, a weekly in the bottom right, daily upper right, and hourly in the upper left. All right, now I'm going to use all four time frames because there's actually two separate trade setups that I want to go into today on this stock. So let's start with the monthly, as we always do. Look at the big picture here, wide angle lens. And notice what happens in this stock as we pull back, make a lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high. We make 1, 2, 3, 4 lower highs. Pretty orderly pullback, some signs of some tails forming, but most important, we've got an 18-month line that was falling and is now cupping around. And as this was pulling back here, it was actually rising underneath. If you also notice, green was staying above red throughout the corrections. We had a pretty deep pullback. I mean, this stock went from what, 160, 170 down to about $60. And yet red was not able to do anything meaningful. And then the moment this turned back up, green took back over, you can see, and actually went right back above 25. So I would consider this a situation. And again, I go into a lot of detail. There's many videos in my course about ADX. And so, but just quickly, I mean, if you think about it, you've got a green that basically was in command, and then red couldn't take control. So when that happens, we know as soon as green gets back above, we basically have green in command again. The other thing that I think is really important here, and really the most important thing that I've been watching in this, was the pinch play developing as this pulled back with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 red bars. Okay. It's kind of rare to have a pinch play where you get that many lower highs, but when you get it, you want to be on the lookout for it. So when this is down in this zone, we don't necessarily want to wait for this to break out up here and give us an entry signal on the monthly. We want to go down to the smaller time frame, weekly, and see if anything is setting up. Now, again, so let's just start with the entry signal. But in fact, the way I look at this is we've got a trend line that you can draw. All right. Now, in fact, you could have drawn this one, or you could have drawn this one because it did go to a new low. All right. In either case, you're getting a buy signal as this is turning back to the upside. In this case, we went to another. So we made lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. And I usually use the last low for my trend line to find the prior high and put in a trend line there. All right. And that would be the anchor point for the trend line. So we go back, we draw our trend line in. But the most important thing about this whole scenario is that the MACD is holding the zero line. All right. There's no real significant selling based on MACD. It got pretty far away, and all it's been doing is working its way back. And if you also notice, look at the strength of the ADX. And then during the corrective pattern, red did not move up, and it didn't get above 25. And the ADX got very low during the decline phase. So again, and then you can also look at, there's no abnormal volume selling throughout this whole decline. There's not one of these red bars that's greater than the moving average of the volume. So with all of that in place, I'm typically looking for my first entry pattern, which is this break of the downtrend and being basically pretty aggressive. I want to buy when it breaks the downtrend line. I don't need to wait for a close or anything like that in most cases. Now, so that's one signal. That's definitely an entry if you wanted to play it that way. Now, if you weren't there, you missed it, or you weren't looking at it at that point. I mean, this is something that I highlight for several weeks on my reports, but let's just say it wasn't, and maybe it just happened too quick, or you were on vacation or something like that, and you're looking for another entry. Well, we've got this move to the upside, and now we get a pullback on the daily chart. All right. Now, what I've told my subscribers is that even if you want to play this off the monthly, weekly, it's still a good idea to get another entry signal, and don't just dive in 3 or 4 weeks to the upside. Look for a signal, at least on the daily, and then you can manage it off the weekly if you want. But if you notice the way this played out, we had a pretty sharp pullback. Okay. And MACD crossed over the signal line. But there's a couple things that developed here that should have led you to believe that this was still a buyable pullback. Number one, these moving averages are still rising. All right, this is still in an uptrend. It's still considered a signal. As long as this is rising, it's considered a signal. The moment it starts to flatten out, roll over, then I'm kind of crossing this off, and I have no interest anymore because I'm thinking maybe I'll get a better entry on the weekly. All right, but in this case, it did drop down. Now, with the crossover to the downside, I typically say, look, I don't really want to buy the first entry. All right. However, there's a couple things you got to keep in mind. And again, there's so much in the detail of this that's part of the reason why I created the course in the first place, is because there was too much detail to try and explain in a video here and there. But what I'll tell you is, the ADX stayed above 25, green stayed above red throughout this whole period. So when I'm seeing that, I'm sort of thinking this is a very strong indication of ADX. All right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that this MACD came down so far that if you were to compare this bottom to this bottom, it's flat. It's basically a double bottom. But if you compare the low that MACD made versus this, you actually have a reverse divergence that had developed. All right. You have to keep an eye out for these. These downside crossovers are ways for you to miss trades. So you have to know and learn the reverse divergence pattern. If you do, you will be ready for this. There was one other tell, I think, in this setup, and that is that on the setup or the trigger side, we actually finally came in the zone here and then came out. You see how it never entered the zone between the 18 and the 40? The 18 crossed down below the 40, and then we stayed out. And we stayed out for an extended period. And then you get a strong move to the upside and go all the way up to the 40 line. All right? Didn't close above it, but then we pull back and test the low. So, again, as I've talked about with my subscribers a lot, to me, this is this is one of my favorite entry signals once this crosses back up. And a lot of times it'll come in the form of just a big green bar crossing back up the 18. So if I see that, all right, and I know I've got a lot of strength in ADX, I also have a reverse divergence, I can kind of ignore this downside crossover and the fact that this overran the 18. I mean, I would definitely continue to keep an eye on the volume. Even though that looked like a big drop, it really wasn't. The volume actually was pretty light on that pullback. So we can take this entry signal coming up through here. In this case, you could do it either the moment it opened up, or you could wait for it to close back above the 40, either way. Notice the volume pattern too, especially as this started to climb back to the upside. Now, again, I know there was some heavy ADX selling to the downside here, but when we go in the zone and come out, this is a trigger too. We want to be a little bit more aggressive, because what we're doing is we're giving the bears a chance to really turn things to the downside. And if they can't, then we want to be aggressive as this turns back up. And we did get green coming back above. So there were definitely some signs of buyers stepping in right as you were getting long again. All right. So I would suggest to you is to study this video because there's a lot of detail. There's the pinch play on the monthly and the fact that we pulled back for 3 or 4 months. The fact that there is two different entry signals on the weekly chart, but typically when we have a zero line reversal with low ADX, we want to draw a trend line and buy the breakout. And then lastly, when you get good momentum behind it, we do want to look for another entry signal if you missed the first one. And just make sure you understand the difference between a real pullback that could be a topping pattern and could cause a longer consolidation versus one that's really not and is actually setting up another buying chance. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.